Once again, good morning to colleagues who've just joined. We're just going to wait a minute or so as we welcome more colleagues into the room. I know we have a number of interested attendees who've registered for this workshop, so we're just going to wait for them to join and then we'll get started shortly. Thank you again for joining us this morning. While we are waiting for a few other colleagues to join us, we will be conducting a short Mentimeter at the beginning and at the end of this workshop. So if you have a smartphone device or your laptop ready for that Mentimeter, we will be sharing the code for that
Okay.
and the link to join later on. Okay, well, I think at this point, with a few of us joining and a few colleagues still beginning to come in, we'll get started. So yes, good morning and welcome to the first of our Fair Implementation Workshop series, starting by supporting fair adoption at the national level in Denmark. Just a quick word on our Fair Implementation Adoption series. This series will aim to help three major key stakeholders, research performing organizations, repositories, and data service providers, and national level initiatives, all to become familiar with fair enabling tools, approaches, and methods. So just a bit of information about Fair Impact as a project. So Fair Impact is funded under the European Commission Horizon Europe program and is one of the Infra-EOS projects. The project builds on the work of the Horizon 2020 Fairs Fair project and is a coordination and support action focusing on expanding fair solutions in Europe. The project has 28 partners from 10 member states and the UK. We began back in June 2022 and will finish in May 2025. So essentially, the Fair Impact is working to support the vision of a European open science cloud where fair data can be shared and reused. Our work focuses on identifying current and emerging tools, methods, and approaches supporting their adoption. A key aim for us is to help ensure that useful resources developed by one community of practice can be adopted by others. So moving on to the content of today's session, before we begin with our Mentimeter quiz. The Danish strategy will be presented by Professor John Renner Hansen from Niels Bohr Institute. He's the chairperson for the Danish National Strategy. We'll then introduce Bjarke Stolz Kaspersen. He'll be speaking about strategic motivation from the perspective of the Danish Ministry of Higher Education and Science. He's a special consultant for the Ministry of Higher Education and Science. Then Anne-Sophie Fink will be giving us the 17 action areas, what, why, and how. She's the head of the DEIC's data management team. Professor John will then wrap up the presentations, taking us around the status and hopes for the future. We'll then move on to a discussion where we can take your questions, and please do feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. You can do that by using the chat function in Zoom. My colleague, who is Suzanne Dumichel, she's the task leader for Work Package 2 for the Fair Impact Project, will then wrap up with a few questions on Mentimeter and next steps as well. So as I mentioned earlier, we'll now look to Mentimeter. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to go into your smart device or on your computer and type in menti.com. That's MENTI.com. The code is 31294253. And I'll also share that in the chat as well for you all. So if you go onto your device and enter those details, we'll shortly begin that element of the presentation. So hopefully you'll be able to see the menti.com presentation. We just have our first slide, which is just a holding slide for the Fair Implementation Workshop series. So firstly, we'd like to get an understanding of where you're coming from. We've welcomed submissions from all over the UK, Europe, and even possibly further afield as well. So please do write in your devices, and I can see that a number of you are responding now, which is great. So the Netherlands, Scotland, and the UK, of course, Denmark. We'd expect a few of you to be coming from there today. And colleagues from Finland and Slovenia. Excellent to see a number of you from variety of countries this morning, and Ireland, Greece, Luxembourg. It's great that we can welcome colleagues from across Europe to learn about our colleagues from Denmark around their national initiative today. So I will move on to the next slide now. We've got a couple more slides before we do get started in the main presentation. A colleague from Japan as well. It's great to see. Sweden. Okay, so what organization do you represent? We have a research performing organization, a repository and data service provider, a national level initiative, an international initiative, and other. Um, so please do feel free to choose what most accurately represents your organization that you are representing today. Okay, we can see there's a number from RPOs today. A fairly even spread throughout the organizations as well. Okay, I'll just give you another 30 seconds or so to click on what organization best represents you. And we can see we've got a fairly even spread actually, which is great to see as well. Great to see a number of our colleagues represented today. So I'll just move on to the next slide. So what best describes your role? Are you a data steward, a researcher, research manager, policymaker, service provider, and other? And if you are other, please feel free to use the free text to explain what your role is within your organization. Perfect. Okay, we've got a number of different roles so far: service providers, information specialist, architects, training coordinator, research data advisor, a research data management support officer, a research data librarian, communications advisor, data steward, service provider. As with the word cloud, the larger they are, the more response we have in that particular area. So it's great to see we have a number of different roles and countries represented today. So I really hope that we're able to benefit from our colleagues from Denmark who will be leading the session. We'll be moving on to them shortly. Because I'll just move to our penultimate slide. At this current time, are you involved in supporting fair adoption at the national level? We do have yes, no. Other is more of a kind of unsure at this point, and potentially something that will become more clear as we go through the presentations. Possibly something that will change over the time of our Fair Implementation Workshop series. And for colleagues who've just joined us, this will be the first of a series of Fair Implementation Workshops where we'll welcome colleagues from across the Fair Impact Programme and associated colleagues to present to various stakeholders. Okay, so the majority are involved, but there's a number of you who aren't, and a couple who are in the other category. So it'll be interesting to see if that particular question answer changes over the series of our Fair Implementation, Fair Impact workshops. So onto our final slide before I welcome Professor John Runner to do our first talk. What are you hoping to get out of today's workshop? and a broad question to bring to you before we invite our speakers to begin the session discussion topics. Good practices, inspiration, good practices again, a better understanding. Want to learn from other countries, some inspiration for things we might do nationally. Overview fair adoption initiatives and fair maturity in Denmark, yes. Good practices, better understanding of current fair initiatives at national level, stakeholders who are involved, how better understanding and inspiration. Inspiration certainly a word that's been used a lot on this particular slide. So yes, I believe we will be inspired by what we have to present today. And we've got a couple more. Inspire with potential for collaboration as well. Ideas about how to implement FAIR at a policy level in our institution. Feedback, okay, and inspiration again, of course. Yeah, I think it's important that we're able to inspire others, and I think the collaboration is an excellent word to use for the work that we have ongoing at Fair Impact as a project as well. But Mentimeter will be left open on this page, and do feel free to comment as we go through the presentations. But at this point, what I will do is I'll stop sharing my slides, and I'd like to welcome Professor John Renner, who will be talking to us firstly about the Danish strategy. John, welcome.
Okay, are you ready? And you can hear me? So I'm just going to present the first part of somehow the timeline, how we developed this e-infrastructure system in Denmark. In the mid-10s, around 2015, we started to develop a new interest in having collaboration between the 8 Danish universities and the Ministry of Higher Education and Research. So we were asked to, can you have the next slide, please? Sandra? Yes, we were asked to create a strategy for a national collaboration on digital research infrastructure. This is only in Danish. I'm sorry, because it's in fact a very nice publication which led to a collaboration. Next push. Sandra, yes, a collaboration among the 8 Danish universities and the Minister of Higher Education. And next slide, please. And somehow where DIKE is working is not only in data management, but we are somehow covering the entire landscape of e-infrastructure. If you look at this one here, you have the horizontal line. It's no, back again. No, like that, yes. So you have at the horizontal line the geographical position of the infrastructure. You have the local one sitting at the universities or research institutions. You have the national one in the middle, and then to the most right, you have the international collaboration. And if you go from bottom to top, you have first the research network, which is somehow gluing everything together, connecting things. You have the data management where you store your data, and then on top you have the HPC, high performance computer systems, locally, nationally, and internationally, with praise in the old days and the Euro HPC systems now as a modern version of that. Where DIKE is now trying to collaborate, please push the button, is this area here. We don't interfere with the universities. They are somehow independent and they do what they would like, but now we have this collaboration trying to glue all this together, both at the national level and at the international level. Please, next slide. Another thing which was pushing very hard was this new version of the directive on open data. And I'm just putting 2 lines here. First of all, it required that there would be an adoption of national policies, and it should somehow support sharing of publicly paid research data from that should be open by default and comply with FAIR principles. And there was actually this very strong push that there should be an adoption of a national policy for that. For that reason, please next slide. For that reason, in the strategy, as I mentioned before, there is a section on data management. As I said, it's in Danish, but I have tried here make a quick translation into English. And what it actually says that the national corporation, which is now named DIKE. So in this strategy, we didn't have a name for it yet, but it's called the Danish Infrastructure Corporation. It has to be a strong contributor to this national strategy on FAIR principles. And it's very important that it has to link up to what we call the Danish Code of Integrity in Research, which was issued by the government in 2014, or by the ministry in 2014. And at that time, data was not so prominent in the way of thinking. So we had somehow to use this strategy to promote use of data in the right way. So it should be somehow we should, from DIKE side, have a significant role in this, together with other stakeholders. For instance, the Ministry of Higher Education and Research, with the universities. We still have sector research institutions, conservation institutions, for instance, museums, etc., where there are research going on, and some libraries, public-private foundations, and other ministers. So it was a conglomerate of many stakeholders adding into this. And please push the button again. So DIKE was formally in 2020 asked to lead this process towards a Danish strategy for fair data management. And it was then decided, as my previous slide, with the Article 10 of the open data, there should be a policy, and this strategy is now considered the Danish policy with respect to Article 10. So next slide, please. So after a year work, we have now delivered in October 2021, or rather it was late summer 2021, but it was accepted by the minister in October 2021, a strategy for a national data management system based on FAIR principles. And please push the button again. So here's the table of content, and it has three main points. First of all, there are principles for data management that supports FAIR, and then that is elaborated, as you can see here. How do we do actually the support? It must be possible to preserve all type. It's very important that this is not just for natural science or for health science. It is all sciences in Denmark, from humanity and social sciences, law schools, to physics, particle, natural science, etc. So it's very important that it's a comprehensive system. And then there's an effort to establish the data management practices that support the FAIR principles, which is somehow the action list. How do we do it? And then a very important part of this is that it has to be financed. And in Denmark, there are two ways of financing research, both from the public money, from government, but there's always also a big private set of foundations who actually would like to make sure that this money is not just being, I will not call it misused, but not used for the right thing. So they control very much, and they would like to know what is FAIR actually, and why should they pay for verification of the data. So the agency, the Agency for Higher Education and Research has established what we call a reference group, who's actually somehow taking care of how do we do this in all the universities. There's a term of reference defining At that time, 13 plus 1 focus areas that has been extended to 17, as you will see in a later presentation. But it's important that the reference group here is a reference group and not a steering committee. And you should somehow see the difference. Universities cannot be steered. They are independent units. They can do what they want. But we try to make a reference group to coordinate across the 8 universities. Next slide, please. And that somehow ends my first presentation of what is the basis of what we are doing with FAIR at the national level in Denmark. And I'll hand over to Bjarke Kaspersen from the minister.
Thank you very much, John. I'll just try to share my presentation. You cannot see all of it, right?
Yes, it's just the presentation mode, I believe. We need to
just a second.
Yep.
How about now?
Yes, looking great.
You see all of it?
We can, yes.
Oh, perfect. Thank you very much for the invitation. I've been looking very much forward to have the opportunity to talk about this issue. Just a very brief introduction. I have a background in research. I've been 6 years in research, and then I have around 7 years now in different Danish ministries. And I've been 1 year at the Ministry of Higher Education and Science, where I am in the Danish Agency for Higher Education and Science. So I'm in the department for research and research infrastructures. I'm involved in the work with the Fair Data Strategy, but I'm also a delegate to the European Open Science Cloud, and think this is a forum where most people know everything about the EOSC, but I'll come a little bit into that as well. I think it's important to start to say that, as John was saying, a lot of this work has been led by DIKE, and we are very happy for that. So I'll try to keep it to the strategic motivation, but also to some focus areas that we see at the political level at the moment, both in Denmark but also in the EU. This is just an outline, so I'll talk a little bit about the Open Data Directive that John already introduced, the National Strategic Plan, a little bit about the link we see to the European Open Science Cloud, and then I will just do a very short, brief presentation of some of the cases that we see at the moment is really relevant when we talk about fair data management and the political strategies. So I think there are several motivational drivers for the National Fair Data Management strategy, but I believe that two is of special importance, and one is the Open Data Directive. So this, from the ministerial point of view, the work with a strategy for fair data management is a national implementation of the Open Data Directive. I think that's important from our point of view, that this is a way to implement the directive. That's one thing, but the other thing that is at least as important is that there is a growing awareness, and it's really a growing awareness about the potential benefits of fair data management for research and for society. This is at the highest political agenda in Denmark. Examples could be healthcare and life sciences. I will return to that later on. It could be the green transitioning that has a lot of focus, not at least in the research area in Denmark, where we are putting a lot of money into this. And it could also be research infrastructures and the use of research infrastructures, and also what we can learn from the research infrastructures in our work with data management. So a key element, as John said, and I will not go into this because I know Anne-Sophie will go into details with this in the next presentation, but we have put down a national reference group and a number of working groups. And as John pointed out, it's very important to say that from our point of view, it was important to say that the ministry and the reference group are not responsible for the implementation of the strategy. It's important that it's the research institutions that do the implementation. So the reference group is just following the implementation, and we'll keep on following it also to see if we are in line with the planned activities. So the reference group coordinates implementations, and they support a common national approach for fair data management across Danish universities and funding organizations, and that both private funding organizations, but also public-private funding organizations. And just from our point of view, it's very important that the 8 universities in Denmark, they don't do individual fair data management. It's important that there is a common strategy, so it's possible for researchers to have the same approach to the data management across the research institutions. Then a little bit about the JOSC. I think we believe that when we are working in the JOSC forum, it's very important for us to kind of stand on the Danish strategy for data management. So all that we do in JOSC, we have a lot of support from DIKE in this work. But at the moment, the big topic is the JOSC post 2027, where we're looking into new governance models. We have to find a model for the European Open Science Cloud post 2027, but we also need to find a new way of funding. The focus of the JOSC enabling a web of fair data and services for science, and also enabling open science policies and the uptake of open science practices. That's very much in line with the work that we do in the national strategy. So we use the national strategy, and it's a motivation for us working with the national strategy in all of the work we do in the European Open Science Cloud. And then a little bit about what we see at the moment, because I am, as I said, in a department where we also work with the research infrastructures, not only the national research infrastructures, but also the big international research structures like ESS and CERN. I'm a delegate to CERN as well myself, and there's a growing focus. We saw it with the high-level presidency conference in Sweden this summer, about the link between fair data management and the EU research, the big EU research infrastructures, that they are supposed to support the implementation of the JOSC, the building up of the JOSC, but also that we have to have a focus on that these are probably in front when it comes to and not at least CERN is in front when it comes to a strategy on fair data management, and we can learn from that. So, but we also take it into our own goals, working with these research facilities. This is just in a few months ago, we published a new report on how Denmark should work across research facilities in Europe. And as you see here, there's 4 themes, and one of them is the research political goals, and fair data is here, as you can see, as important for the Danish work on research infrastructures as sustainable operations, green research, and equal rights. So you see that we use this strategy also when we are in other fields, and say that it is important that it's spread out through all that we work with. And then just to give an example of another, and I'm part of this National Danish Partnership for Health Data. It's the Ministry of Health that is responsible for this, but that's a very huge partnership across research institutions, ministries, local governments. We have some of the very huge pharmaceutical firms, Novo Nordisk, Roche, in this partnership, and where it's about doing the same as you actually want to do within the European Open Science Cloud, but you want to have one entrance and no entrances behind that for health data in Denmark. And you want it for the the researchers to do better research. You want it for healthcare to be even better. The development of personal medicine, for example, but also as an opportunity to do business in a whole new way. And that's the focus of the big pharmaceutical companies. And you can really feel that this is an area that in the Danish context is of huge importance. And what is important here, I think, is that fair data management is at the core of all of this. If you want to do what this partnership wants to do, then you need to have fair data management. So just to end my presentation, I will say that from the ministry's point of view, the Danish fair data strategy we have seen a significant progress across Danish universities. They are working with a number of use cases that we really think support a concrete implementation of the strategy at the universities. We have an ongoing close dialogue with the university management. That's been one of the questions from the reference group, but also for the working groups, that how close are the university managements to the work that they do. So the vice director of our agency just had a meeting with some of the deans from different universities about this, and we will continue this close dialogue with the university management. And then I think one important aspect is to address the timeline of the implementation, because right now we work for 2 years, maybe 3 years at a time, but this is a process that will take many years, and I think we need to be we need to work with the universities on how do we do this in the long run, and when do we need to fulfill what is now outlined in the strategy. But that was my presentation for now. Thank you very much, and I will give it to Anne-Sophie Fink, who will give a fast deep dive into the work of the reference group and the working groups as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bjarke. I think that's a fair presentation of what I want to do. So let me just share my screen. You can see my screen?
We can, yes.
I'm trying to get the presenter mode. Yes. And now how is it I get out of?
We can see on our screen the presentation.
The presentation and not in percentage mode.
That's right, yes.
Okay, so I'll go from here. Yes, I was invited, and thank you for that, to take a sort of a deep dive into the actual the area suggested to follow up on the strategy. So supporting, the fair adoption, and this is one of the ways. We have the national strategy just presented by John and Bjarke, and now let's look into how things is done, and the what, why, and how, and as far as we can get at this side. Let me mention, my name is Anne-Sophie Fink. I'm head of the data management in DAG, and has been working in this area for many years. As John mentioned, there's a reference group, and there's appointed 6 working groups. We have a new mandated period for 23 to 24. And the reference group has members from our 8 Danish universities. That's all we got here in Denmark, which makes sense as we're a small country. They're from the Danish universities, from the management, from research funding agencies, and again, management of the Danish Ministry of Education and Science. Then we have the working group, and for these working group, we have appointed researchers, data management managers, IT developers, I guess data steward as well, research support of all kinds at the universities, and from research performing and supporting organizations. So this is the people who actually is doing stuff on a daily basis for making implementation of the FAIR principles. We have these 6 working group, and you can also call them these are the sort of the action areas, sort of in order to divide things in some structured slices. Group A, working with policies, tools, and research support for fair data management. Group B, looking at establishing fair infrastructure and long-term preservation. Group C, looking at fair financial planning. Group D will look into how to plan for increasing fair competencies and knowledge. Group E are looking at security aspects for fair cooperation on fair data. And Group F is on the value of data. And just to repeat what John and Bjarke was mentioning, is that these groups are sort of these groups are looking into what is being done at the universities. They're not supposed to take action as such. They are supposed to follow up on what's actually being done out there with concerns to the implementation of the FAIR principles. And of course, we can say putting sort of the spotlight on these activities will hopefully also, we think that, will sort of inspire and push for more work in these areas. Now I'm really going into details, and it will be maybe a bit of me reading aloud, but I think it has some value even though, and I'm sure from the fair impact side of things, we will be able to share the slides. For the working group A, that is on policies, tools, and research support, there's sort of 3 action areas appointed. And number 1 is to survey how do the different academic disciplines work with the implementation of the FAIR principles in research practice. So what is being done? What is going to be changed, or what's planned to be changed, or what's actually have been changed in all aspects of research practice. The second area this group will look at is what policies, as well as motivating and supporting efforts, exist to support access to and research of research and reuse of research data, including the use of persistent identifiers for digital research objects. And of course, let's mention that we have a special focus on the use of persistent identifiers, very much also work done in the Fair Impact project, but this is what we and most other things, it's one of the key aspects of making a fair implementation. Action 3 is to describe best practices for data governance and policies, guidelines for maintaining overall responsibility for data, even after research has left the institution and or project funding has ended. I'm sure a lot of you who are working with these things in practice will know this sort of a challenge we have there. And again, we want to survey, this group needs to survey what is being done in this line of things for the fair implementation. Action areas for group B, and this is the group that want to survey how we establish a fair infrastructure and long-term preservation. We'll be surveying what infrastructure is available for long-term preservation, and that we have set to be 10 years or longer, for research data of all kinds at the national level. And how is coherence and cooperation ensured for long-term preservation between the research institution stake in the Danish National Archives. Very important, and for FAIR, we need to have this look at how things are handled in a long-term perspective. Action area 5, how can services for data management plans continue to be developed nationally and internationally, made machine readable, and used in connection with the notification of research data to the Danish National Archives. Here we want to survey how our data management plan supporting research, and how can we cooperate, because for some research projects, researchers needs to offer their data to the Danish National Archives, and this should be done as easy as possible. Action area 6: how do research institutions work with security infrastructure, specifically and especially for sensitive data, with the perspective that this can be made fair too. I will think that some of you will recognize this sort of dilemma between the GDPR focus we have had for several years now, and what is actually security infrastructure, taking on a broader scale, and putting FAIR into this context. So we need to survey that for our FAIR implementation strategy. Action areas for working group C. This was about the FAIR financial plan. EU programs require grant recipients to develop data management plan in connection with the applications. To what extent can National Research Foundation benefit from following this practice? This is really something we hope is discussed, and it has to be discussed even more, because that's sort of a potential bridge to FAIR implementation. Can research data that forms the basis for published research results be required to be made available according to the FAIR principle after the end of the project, with at least metadata and a persistent identifier? And again, even when the data is not openly available. Sensitive data is an issue here, but also just to make some kind of a minimal viable amount of metadata available, in order to say we have a FAIR implementation. Action area 9. Which expenses for data management can be included in budgets? That's from the first period where we have been looking at the implementation of the FAIR strategy. This is a big issue. How can we actually put into the project proposals that we need funding, that research needs funding, so for doing these things. Action area for Group D, plan for increasing FAIR competences and knowledge. Action area 10, what competence profiles have the research institutions set up for the data stewardship research support functions for researchers? How have the research institutions built the data stewardship research support functions for researchers? I'm sure you all have this sort of challenge about how we build up competences on data stewardship, and actually data stewards that are there to help out and to support the researchers. Action area 11. To what extent is there interest in developing and offering the research support function collaborative at a national level? For instance, under a central or decentralized national competence centers. You might here acknowledge a sort of an inspirational link to the EOSC project Skills for EOSC as some potential synergy there. Action area 12. Is there interest at the research institution in national coordination of FAIR research data management courses? Could a possible national collaboration include agreement on division of labor, specialization, and a collaborative national offer of educational courses. For instance, in the form of a competence center under the auspice of DAIC. Courses would encompass a range of academic level, including bachelor's to continuing education for academic staff. Again, to repeat ourselves, we are not the ones to decide what is happening on the university. That will come sort of motivated from within the university and what's needed from researchers. But we will look into if there's something like that could support what the universities, the way they want to go. Action area 13, how are incentive structures or merit recognition currently used nationally or internationally, maybe and or internationally for fair data management practices at the research institution. Again, you'll recognize this how can we actually acknowledge that people are working in this area and are doing important stuff for creating fair data management. Action area for group E, a security aspect for cooperation on fair data. Action area 14, what requirements must be made for security in connection with the storage and sharing of data. Again, we're looking what is being done at the universities and this taking this work in a more fair direction. Action area 15, in light of research groups needs to be able to work nationally and internationally with sensitive data, which requires strong and flexible governance. Which national and international solutions or services can support these needs? What is actually implemented out there? What is used? And especially with this focus on sensitive data. I think we all know that no, I shouldn't say that. At least we have needs to give more attention to the aspect of sensitive data. Action area 16, can a better understanding of the spectrum of data sensitivity be provided? This means not only sensitive personal data, GDPR, but also agreement, dual use, preprints, IPR, etc., including the researcher's own criteria for how the sensitivity of that data can be understood. Again, this group needs to look into what is actually the practices up there and how research is working on a sort of a micro level and universities on an organizational level. Then, last but not least, the action area for working group devs, the value of data, and this is actually a group that has been added upon the first period where we have been looking at the implementation of the fair strategy, because we think this is something that needs some special attention. For of course, for one thing you would say this aspect is all over in the working group, but we have seen it as a need to give it special attention. So what criteria for data value, creation, and economics models do local, national, and international data storage services use to assess data preservation, rational economics, and sustainability? And especially happy to see that actually the word sustainability is found among the activities we need to look into. So just again briefly, and this is work is about to start. So we are nearly there, and maybe even in the line of the Fair Impact Project, we can have a report on what things how things have been developing in Denmark. The action areas address the current status of fair data management. As I think you've seen, they have been chosen with regards to what we already know about fair in Denmark, report from 2022, where we already had this sort of surveying on the implementation activities in the fair data management. So very much inspired from that, very much to sort of to push forward for doing this, these or taking action in these areas. Implementation of fair research data management in Denmark is not widespread yet. We are doing actually better by a minute, but we see lots of things going on, and sort of also, as Bjarke mentioned, intensified focus on the FAIR principles and on the fair data management. The strategy is a way to assess how far the universities and research foundations has come, while or maybe before actual implementation of the fair research data management happens. So lots of things go on already, and we foresee that lots of new activities will be taken on to move in this direction. And this was what I sort of our deep dive into what's the actually action areas we would want to look at and want to survey and report back on what's being done in a university. Again, we're not the ones to tell the university what to do. We hope the motivation will be intrinsic for the university to move in this direction. And the contact points on sort of if you want to know more about both the reference group, but especially the working group, is us working on these things in DIKE. That's Sandra Borman, who's part of the VP2 and have been arranged this webinar to share the information with you, René Belsø and myself. Yeah, let's see you have questions, and please feel free to get in contact with us. And again, maybe we can, we hope we can turn this into a great fairy tale, and things, at least that things are working in the right direction. So I'll stop sharing now, and then I'll give the floor to John for a little wrap up and looking more into the perspective foreseen.
Yes, thank you very much, Sandra. Could you share my slide deck? Just continue where we stopped last time. Let me just start out saying that this change we are in, I mean, this cultural change is enormous. And I would say it's the biggest cultural change in the Danish university system since the Reformation in 1537. I mean, that was really a big change. But now here we are taking away data from the researchers, which they believe belong to them, and now even require that we share them with them. So this is a long process. It's going to be a complete new education for our researchers. And a fairy tale, as Anne-Sophie asked for, I'm sure it will take a very long time before it's going to be a fairy tale. So please, first slide here. Again, just reminding that we have the strategy, we have, and please push the button again, we have the 8 universities in Denmark. And one thing I want to point out, these 8 universities are very different. There are 5 comprehensive universities covering a lot of different areas. But we also have 3 very specific universities, the IT University in Copenhagen, we have the CBS, Copenhagen Business School, and then we have DTU, the Danish Technical University, all 3 monofaculty universities. And the difference in size between the IT University and University of Copenhagen is a factor of 30. So you see there is somehow huge difference in culture, there's huge difference in sizes. So this is what we want to organize. And this is exactly, we should state all the time, there is no one size fits all method here. We have somehow to learn from each other, but they also have to make their own independent development because they are different. Please, next slide. So I'll just go very quickly through a status report that came out by the end of 22, somehow pointing the direction of future work. As you can see, there's a lot of collaboration between universities and ministry and DIKE. And the first report here came up with one very important recommendation, and that is that we have to share knowledge. We cannot just talk, we have to have a common place to share knowledge. And we're using two things. We're using Zenodo, and there is a link there to the report and to the area where we are storing in a public way, in a shared way, our findings. And then we also use the DIKE platform to share information. So this is one very important thing, knowledge sharing. Please, next slide. If you push this button here, you get into Zenodo, and as you can see there, it was opened the 12th of October last year, so it has exactly existed for 1 year since Sandra opened this page. Feel free to go in. Some of it is unfortunately in Danish, but most of it in English. Please, next slide, please. So now I'll go very quickly. I've simply taken Anne-Sophie's slides and then taken away all the action points, but then trying somehow to say, where are we now in this? Because this is, as you might feel, it is a huge task with these 17 different action areas. So where are we in the policies, tools, and research? And the first thing they were setting up, saying, we want to have examples, we want to have very good use cases here. And they have, in fact, made a list of these, for instance, 4 use cases, which you can find at Zenodo, which covers water research, it is plant diseases, it's infrastructure, and here it's one of the ISFRI projects, and then it's FAIR for register-based research. You know, a lot of information is collected at hospitals, other places, which then, please go back, Sandra, which is then just sitting there and people can make research, but it's very difficult to somehow get around these data. So FAIR is an important instrument to improve the access to the register-based data. Another goal is to establish a national data stewardship group to set up a common understanding of what is actually the reasons why we should have data stewards, how should they be educated, where should they come from, and again, they will be different whether they're going to support social science, humanity, or they're going to support health science. So it's important to get an understanding of that. Please, next slide. One thing they group A and B actually somehow in their investigation realized that all 8 universities have data management policies. And these policies, they reference to the Danish Code of Conduct for Research Integrity, which I somehow stated in my first presentation. It's very important that our strategy link up to this Code of Conduct. So it's also stated that it should be shareable, and it should be as open as possible, as closed as necessary. It's emphasized in all the policies that the data should be treated in a good way. It should be stored secured and responsible, and it should be sure that we know who is responsible for the infrastructure of storage systems. But it's also important that there should be somebody responsible for the use of the infrastructure. So there's a difference between the infrastructure itself and the use of it. And data must be stored at a minimum of 5 years, and this is far too little. So that's one thing we have to look into. Next slide, please. So Group B is about the infrastructure and long-term preservation. And one thing which point at immediately is that we need a policy for 5 to 10 years of data preservation. We need somehow we need infrastructure to do it, and we need general policies. And here comes in the last working group on the value, because you don't want to have a long-term preservation for data with no value, which you can create very fast, or they have been outdated completely. You don't want to save them for a long time. So there is a very tight link between the last working group and this working group here, because we don't want to waste resources on long-term preservation. And we need a roadmap. And from one thing which is not said here, I think it's very important we think international here. It's very long-term preservation, and particularly if it goes beyond 15 years, might be something we should do in between nations. Maybe we could have the Nordic countries go together, or it could even be an EU project for what we really want to keep for a long time. Next slide, please. One thing on the infrastructure is that we are now building a national storage system. It will be ready. It's being tested by friendly users for the moment, and it will be ready in the most likely second quarter of next year. On top of that, there will be a trusted repository based on our Dataverse, and that will be ready at the same time. So this will be offered to all our researchers across the country. So there will be a national storage system and a national trusted repository. Next slide, please. And that is, by the way, it's Dijk who is now somehow initiating this, but it is implemented by the University of Copenhagen for the storage system and the University of Aarhus, and for the trusted repositories, it is University of Copenhagen. So Dijk is not implementing these things. We are just giving the job to one of the 8 universities. So there is a goal of having a catalog of data management plan templates, and there we have simply realized that what's called DMP Online simply contains what we need, and that's the recommendation. It is now from 1st of October renamed to Dijk DMP, and that is somehow where we are at that. It might change. We want to improve this, but it seems to be a very good tool. Next, please. The financial plan, well, we don't have any final decision. We just have a recommendation that we should continue to talk between the public funding and the private foundations, because it is very important that we get a list now here. We create lists of expenses to create fair data sets. It is definitely not for free. What is basic infrastructure, what is now extra, and what is very extra, depending on how you're using data. And we should agree who's going to pay what and when and for how long time. Because if you want to make a long-term preservation, well, most private foundations do not want to have a bill coming in for some research they paid for 15 years ago. Next slide, please. Plan for increasing the fair competences and knowledge. Well, and Sophie already commented quite a lot on that. That's very good. We need somehow a common system in Denmark, so the students, when they move from one university to another, PhD students, etc., they somehow have the same idea of what fair is and why we are doing it and how we are doing it. And for that reason, we now have selected here focused on as a recommendation that we use fair competence framework for higher education, as you can find at Synodal. That will be our somehow main focus. Please, next. And we have to make sure that there are incentives, and we have to break down the barriers for the researchers. And there are many ideas what to do that, but good knowledge, as Bjarke said, it becomes more and more clear that FAIR is going to improve the value and the efficiency of research. And that is very important that we somehow know that across the nation. And it is then recommended there is no need for a FAIR research data management competence forum. We can use the existing forum. So here, the recommendation from the group is we should not go further. Please, the next one. Security, I don't want to go into a deep detail on that either. They say we need somehow to understand what the problem is. We have to see what kind of data sets have what kind of problems from a security point of view. And this is going to be a very integrated path because all the universities have huge, I would not say problems, but they have to be very focused on having their data systems, whether it's research data or administrative data, stored in a safe way. So it is the universities who actually should build up competences locally to make sure that they can have a safe system. Next, please. I'm not going to go into this. They have not been opened yet. We are calling for members these days, or we've just found them, and it will be established. But it is very important, as I said before, to have an idea of what is value. Value is more than what it costs to create data. It is also a value if you all can create them again. There are data which can only be created once, but it's very important to know whether they should be preserved or not. Next slide, please. So this is the end of my presentation. I hope you get a feeling that it's, as you know, it's hard work. It's a lot to do. And these are our focus areas, and we are looking forward for the next of these webinars to understand what other of our colleagues are doing and learn from them as well. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Bjarke. Thank you, Anne-Sophie. Excellent presentations, and I think we can really take a lot from what you said around the impact around the fair implementation around Denmark as well. We've had a few questions from the audience. If I could put these to the three of you now, if you wouldn't mind. With first one, in what way do the data management requirements include the FAIR principles?
Maybe I should just mention that all the policies at the universities actually include both data management, and they require the data management plans are based on FAIR principles, or included. I mean, so this is, universities agree that this is important.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, John. Have you had to come up with different ways to engage with the public and private RPOs? Are they motivated by the same drivers?
I don't know who should take that one, but no, they are not. If I should just start, I think the public already pays an overhead, so they feel that they are already including some of the expenses for that, where the private foundations, they actually don't give overhead, and that's one of the problems. So we have somehow to increase until this is a part of the research process, and that's where the main discussion is.
Bjarke or Anne-Sophie, would you like to come in to add anything to that at all?
No, I think that's the same picture I get.
Yeah, but I can maybe just add that it is actually a big focus both from the private and the public. So the private are also very interested in this.
Thank you very much. Are the members of the working groups volunteers, or are they remunerated for their participation?
I can say that. They are remunerated for their participation, but it's the university who appoints them, so they know best who are actually doing these things, or who are the expert. They're seen as the expert in their respective fields.
Thank you very much. We've got a comment followed by a question here. I've skimmed through the Danish documents mentioned here. Fair data management is mentioned a lot, but light on technical details. There is only one open standard data technology that has FAIR principles built in by design. The W3C RDF stack, URI identifiers, graph metadata model, and formats, aka semantic web, aka knowledge graphs. How do you expect to ensure semantic interoperability if you are not mandating the standard technology that was built for such interoperability?
maybe I could say most likely this is something discussed in the working group B of the infrastructure. And I have not seen them so far yet, but the comment is correct. We need standards of that type, and they will come from work group B. But again, we cannot force. If some universities already have made up their mind, it might be that it is not possible to have a national standard.
Okay, thank you very much. A couple more comments before we move on to Suzanne, who'll be wrapping up the session with Mentimeter questions. In your discussion, John, you recommended DMP online until something better becomes available. What should the better option be available? Marguerite mentioned possibly to consider the DS Wizard.
That was a direct question to me. I have no direct proposal for that. That is what the group recommended, and most likely they didn't find something. If there are other things, we should certainly consider that.
Thank you. And sorry, I should say that was your presentation rather than your thoughts individually, John. And finally, Björk mentioned the relation between the national approach and EOS concerning a fair financing plan. Do you already have an idea how the recent EOS task force report about financial sustainability is relevant and applicable nationally?
That's a tough question. I think actually that René Bessø, that was attending this meeting, was close to this working group. But I think this is part of the discussions ongoing in the European Open Science Cloud Steering Board at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have anything to add, René, about this?
Yeah, it's for sure that the main focus of the whole sustainability question and the future of EOS beyond 27 is the question of national engagement and aligning national efforts with European efforts. And it seems pretty clear that this boils down to the funding model and the organizational model. So the funding model has to be made such that the national funding supplements the EC funding, as opposed to the EC funding going in alone, and then the national funding being used for something else or national needs. So this is I think, the focus of the future conclusions.
Thank you, René. Thank you, Björk. Are there any other questions or comments from anyone who's joined us today before we move on to wrapping up the session? No, I can't see anything. But before I hand over to Suzanne, thank you to our speakers today, to John Runner, to Anne-Sophie, and for Björk for your time today. I think really valuable insights for us, and thank you for sharing with such a wide and diverse audience today as well. So, Suzanne, I'll hand over to yourself, and I'll share the Mentimeter now.
Yeah, thank you, Al. Indeed, thank you very much. So we will ask you a quick question related to the Mentimeter. So yeah, if you can so use the code. It's you can see on the slide 31 29 42 53 in order to give a bit of feedback about this session. But first, I also would like to highlight that for the first session that we organized within the Fair Impact project, we are very glad to see that more than 50 people and almost 60 at some point were here to hear from the Denmark situation related to the Fair Action Plan and Open Science Plan. So it's a huge number, so we are very happy with that. And it shows that there is a strong interest to better understand the situation in the different countries and how these type of plans are built, who is involved in the building and in the making of this type of plan and roadmap at the national level. So that's great. I also would like, of course, to thank our speakers because you made very very interesting presentation, and each of them complement the previous one. So it was a full picture of how you organize yourself in Denmark. So thank you for that. And we can see the first answers coming from the audience about how this session can help with their own work. So we can see concrete insight to the working group task, how to organize the work into working groups, that it is interesting to see how the work in Denmark is related to our work with FAIR. The real life example, indeed, we had a few examples about that. Great set of questions, so that's good as well. The cultural change within academia, which need top-down and bottom-up support initiative, indeed. And I think it was very clear, mentioned and shown this morning with both the top-down and the bottom-up meeting at some point to make sure that the plan is fitting for everyone. Some other ideas, how Denmark is organized and what they are focused on that might help us connect to the right people if needed. Yeah, so it's also in terms of collaboration and partnership. The complexity of an independent university structure combined with the national and international initiative. Great, so we have a couple of good feedback. Interesting to see all the goals that the working groups are working with. Yeah, indeed. And the width of the scope needed to implement FAIR. Yeah, and I think that's a very good point indeed, because for the FAIR implementation, you notice that it's not only related to data, and it's not only technical, but it implies a lot of other organizational aspects related to the human, the budget, the organizational structure of the university or the national landscape. So that's and this is something that we have. That the example, the Denmark example, was the Danish example was really clear about that. Thank you, Al. I think we have another question. Maybe we can move to the next one. Yeah, thank you. So, what action do you plan on taking? Do you plan on taking based on what you have heard today? So, normally we expect that based on this session, you have learned something. At least it was my case. And after learning how to implement, how to concrete, make some plan. What can you do? What can we do together in order to support the implementation of the FAIR at different layer in the country, organization, for scientists, and so on. So let's start to think concretely about implementation and not only discussion and sharing knowledge. So do we have first answers? I guess people need a bit more time to reflect and yeah, and one answer first. Further knowledge sharing with colleagues at other organization. Okay, so the first point would be then starting to better exchange and inform about with other colleagues, probably to make some plan then. Considering how to get the different stakeholders to start talking about the issues. Yeah, that's indeed an important point as well, because when you want to work on the implementation of FAIR in your organization or in the country, you need first to understand what are the stakeholders and who are there, how to contact them in order to address the right issues since the beginning. Third proposition, thinking about how to integrate FAIR competencies in professional competence profiles for researcher, research support staff, and students. So I'm really happy, to be honest, because the points that are mentioned right now are completely aligned with the support program on the national initiative that we launched within the task 2.5 and will start in January. So you still can apply for your own organization. And we have one session about involving the different stakeholders. We have one session about integrating the FAIR competencies in the professional competence profile. Create roadmap for implementing the FAIR infrastructure from data capture to final repository. So here again, this point the creation of roadmap actually is the main goal of the support program that we provide, not only for the national initiative, but also for the data and service provider and for the RPO. So that's the goal of the support program. So feel free to apply. And now, you know, I'm making my own advertisement during this session, which was not, but yeah, anyway. Share what I have learned here today with my working group and work with FAIR. Indeed, that's the first step. Always sharing in order to make sure that people have the same understanding. Revisit our own action plan to reflect on whether we've considered all the different aspects. So I'd be happy to know more about this action plan. I don't know who put this answer, but if some of you already have an action plan on the implementation of FAIR, would be good to know who and how it has been made as well, because it's always interesting to have this type of feedback, especially because we would like to organize other sessions like this one. So yeah, feel free to let us know. And we have a question from Marianne to the colleague who wrote from data capture to final repository. Would you also consider to begin the data lifecycle in the repository with actual reuse? So I don't know who wrote this point, but if this person would like to take the floor, it's completely fine, or answer directly in the chat. Feel free to do so. Do we have someone willing to take the floor? No. Okay, Marianne, sure. Okay. So if you want, feel free to answer in the chat, and the same for the one who put the comment about the own action plan. Would be happy to know who mentioned that. Not work alone at a local level, but build from national strategy and national research infrastructure, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, indeed. We cannot achieve a concrete implementation of the FAIR if the work is made alone. So this is exactly what we aim at within the FAIR Impact project, and especially within the work package too. So with the type of event that we organize, such as this one. And it's really good to see that with the Danish example, at least in my view, we started with a very good, both concrete and both bottom-up and top-down example. Yeah, I think that was very inspiring for most of us. Johan, I can't speak up, but I wrote about revisiting our action plan. I'm network manager at the Dutch TDCC NES. Okay, thank you. So I will keep that in mind and probably come back to you then. So it would be good to also have this type of presentation about your own action plan. Thank you. Great. Do we have, I think we have another question, or I'm sorry, Al, I'm not sure.
That's all for the questions, Suzanne.
Perfect. Okay. Great. Thank you, Al. So thank you, everyone, especially John, Sophie. So yeah, all the speakers today. Very, very great to have you. And thanks to the audience as well. It's really good to see that you were very interested in following this type of event. So with that, I think we can close. Joy put in the chat that there will be another presentation of the support program next Wednesday at 2 p.m. And she put the link to register. So please have a look and don't hesitate to apply to one of the 3 support programs that we offer, as it will be a good occasion for you all to work on a concrete implementation plan of the FAIR. Either at the RPO level or at the data service provider level or at the national initiative, national level. So yeah, and with that, I want to thank you all, wish you a nice day, nice end of week, and thank you very much.